guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we'll be discussing plasma proteins. I believe if you have a medical background, you definitely know what plasma protein is, or definitely have some knowledge on what plasma protein is. So, in a hematology video, if you haven't watched, you have to go and watch. We talked about the composition of blood, and then we said the liquid portion of the blood, which is mostly referred to as the plasma, contains electrolytes, hormones, proteins, water. We have metabolites, both xenobiotics and endogenous. Then we have nutrients. Today our focus is going to be on the proteins. We are going to find out the types of proteins that are found within the plasma. The types of protein that are found within the plasma. So, under plasma proteins, for us to know the different types of protein, we would have to separate this protein by a process we call electrophoresis. So the electrophoresis separates the proteins based on their charges. So this one is another of increasing charge. Albumin has a higher net or a greater net negative charge than alpha 1 and alpha 2 globulins, than beta globulins, than fibrinogen, and then than gamma globulins. So the separation of the plasma proteins are done by electrophoresis, and it is based on their charges. So we could say that albumin has a greater negative charge than all of these ones. Okay, so the greater the negative charge, the faster the migration to the positive electrode in the electrophoresis process. Alright, so when we do electrophoresis on plasma proteins, these are the types of proteins that we find. Albumin, then we have alpha 1 and alpha 2 globulins, then we have beta globulins, then we have fibrinogen, then we have the gamma globulins. Now let's pick albumin and discuss about albumin. So albumin has a molecular weight of 69 kilodaltons, and it constitutes 60% of the entire plasma protein. So we can say that albumin has the majority of the entire plasma protein. It constitutes of the majority of the entire plasma proteins. And as we all know, since it's a protein, definitely it's going to be made up of amino acids. And these amino acids are oftentimes linked by disulfide bonds. So it contains 585 amino acids with 17 disulfide bonds. Then 40% of the albumin are in the plasma, and the other 60% are found in the extracellular plasma. So the overall albumin, only a 40% proportion of it is found within the plasma. The rest is also found in the intracellular spaces as well. Now let's go ahead and talk about the function of albumin. So albumin is responsible for 75% to 85% of plasma oncotic pressure. Now let's talk about plasma oncotic pressure over here. So oncotic pressure is the same as osmotic pressure, and it's the pressure that pulls water into the circulatory system or the vascular compartment. So the force or the pressure that pulls water or substances into the vascular compartment is what we call the oncotic pressure. So albumin is responsible for about 75 to 80% of the plasma oncotic pressure. So it means if there is less albumin, there is going to be a leakage of substances from the vascular compartment into the interstitial space. So once this pressure comes down, this pressure will increase because it has to be in a balance. Once the oncotic pressure comes down, the hydrostatic pressure will increase, and therefore fluids are likely to drain from the intravascular space to the interstitial space. Another function of albumin is that it plays a major role in fluid distribution and maintaining of blood volume. So it also boils down to this same phenomenon. So albumin is responsible for the regulation of fluid within the compartment, the body fluid compartment. So for instance, when there is a drop in blood volume, there is an increase in the oncotic pressure and a decrease in the hydrostatic pressure, which allows water from the interstitial space to enter into the vascular compartment to compensate for the blood loss. So it means if there is no albumin or there is low albumin, that will not be possible. When there is low albumin, instead of water draining from the interstitial space into the vascular compartment to compensate for blood loss or for loss of intravascular fluid, it will be the vice versa. Fluid will drain more from the intravascular fluid into the interstitial space. Since there is no albumin and there is less oncotic pressure, the hydrostatic pressure will definitely increase. So that is another function. Okay, albumin also acts as a transporter of molecule by binding to various ligands. So albumin is also a transport protein. There are certain proteins that are not soluble in plasma or are not soluble in water. So they has to be carried by a transport protein. And albumin is one of the major transport proteins that we have. Most of the proteins travel through the body by binding to albumin. Yeah. Another function of albumin is that it serves as a major source of amino acid for protein synthesis. Now we know that amino acids are very essential in protein synthesis. So albumin contains 585 amino acids. And we know these amino acids contains the nucleotide, etc., etc. And during protein synthesis, this nucleotide is what are utilized for the formation of proteins. So the more amino acids we have, or the more albumin we have, the more amino acids we have. And the more amino acids we have, the more nucleotides we have available for protein synthesis. So we can also say it serves as a major source for amino acid for tissue protein synthesis. Okay. And then we can also talk about it acting as a buffer or maintaining acid base balance. So there is this amino acid that is predominant or that is dominant in albumin, and that is histidine. And histidine has a known function of maintaining body homeostasis by maintaining an acid base balance. So that is also another function of albumin. Now, low plasma albumin, also called hypoalbuminemia. Now, when there is low albumin in the body, there could be consequences that the body can face, and these low albumin are caused by certain factors such as dilutional factor, distribution of albumin from the plasma into the extracellular fluid space, and then decreased synthesis of albumin, increased catabolism, and then increased loss of albumin from the body. So when we talk about dilutional, we can talk about artifactual factors. So for instance, when you are drawing a blood sample to test for albumin, you should not take it from a site that has been administered with intravenous fluid, because it's going to cause plasma dilution, and once there is plasma dilution, there is definitely going to be a reduction of albumin. So we advise we take blood sample at appropriate sites. So we advise we take blood sample at the appropriate site. Then we can talk about administration of excess protein free fluid. So this is also one cause of the dilutional factor. Then we can talk about fluid retention like edema, etc. All this one can cause hypoalbuminemia, and they are all dilutional factors. Then we talk about redistribution of albumin from the plasma into the extracellular fluid compartment or system. So, for instance, when there is a leakage within the endothelium, albumin seems to move from the intravascular compartment into the extravascular fluid system, and that causes a decrease in plasma albumin concentration. Then we can talk about decreased synthesis of albumin. We know albumin is basically synthesized in the liver. In fact, majority of the proteins, a large proportion of the proteins are synthesized in the liver. So when there is a decreased synthesis of protein too, it can cause what we call hypoalbuminemia. And we talk about increased catabolism too. So just like any other metabolic process, there is always a building up and a breaking down. So once the breaking down of albumin begins to go higher, there is also what we call hypoalbuminemia. Then increased loss of albumin from the body. So for instance, in situations like nephrotic syndrome, where there is a defect in the glomerulus of the kidney, there seems to be a leakage of albumin into the urethra, and it is excreted into the urine, and this also can cause significant loss of albumin from the body. Alright, so that is it for albumin. Now let's have this case study. This case study talks about how malnutrition can cause edema. So we know that albumin constitutes 60% of the proteins. So whatever protein food we eat, a large proportion of that protein food contains albumin, and albumin is actually the real protein food that we take in. So when there is malnutrition, or when someone is malnourished, what happens is that there is a decrease in albumin, or there is hypoalbuminemia. And once there is a decrease in albumin, we know what will happen here. Albumin constitutes about 75 to 80% of the plasma oncotic pressure, meaning that when there's a drop in plasma oncotic pressure or drop in albumin, there's a drop in plasma oncotic pressure. And once there's a drop in plasma oncotic pressure, there's an increase in hydrostatic pressure. So the hydrostatic pressure, what it does is that it drives fluid from the vascular compartment into the interstitial space. So once hydrostatic pressure increases, fluid will be moved from the intravascular compartment into the interstitial space. And what happens is that when there is fluid retention in the interstitial space, there is a system called the lymphatic system that's responsible for the transfer of all these leakages back into systemic circulation. But then when this, especially the thoracic lymphatic vessel, is responsible for that duty, and when it gets overwhelmed, when it is no longer able to drain all the excess fluid that are found in the interstitial space, when that happens, there is what we call edema. So the fluid begins to retain in the interstitial space that is just beneath the skin, and you can see a swelling, or what we call edema. So real quick, if oncotic pressure is greater than hydrostatic pressure, there is no movement of fluid across either compartment. But if oncotic pressure is less than hydrostatic pressure, fluid moves from the vascular compartment into the interstitial space. So that is it for albumin. So we have to just understand that albumin is one of the major proteins that is found in the body, and in the absence of albumin it can really cause a whole lot of problems. All right, then I think increased loss of albumin from the body, aside glomerulonephritis or the leakage of albumin through the glomerulus, also body burns too can also cause a reduction of when someone experiences excessive burns, it can cause hypoalbuminemia. Now let's talk about the globulins. That will be our second protein, plasma protein. So for the globulins, we can divide the globulins into three major parts. We have the alpha globulins, beta globulins, and then the gamma globulins or the immunoglobulins. So in the electrophoresis, we have alpha globulin coming before beta globulin. So for the alpha globulin, we have alpha 1 antitrypsin, we have alpha 1 acid glycoprotein or orosomucoid. Then we have alpha fetoprotein. Then we have high density lipoprotein or alpha 1 lipoprotein. Then we have alpha 2. In alpha 2 we have haptoglobin, we have alpha 2 microglobulin, we have ceruloplasmin, we have alpha 2 antiplasmin, then we have protein C and protein S. Now these are also proteins that are found within the plasma, and they are called alpha proteins. They have specific functions just like albumin. So here we will discuss some of their functions. So we have alpha 1 globulins. The first one is alpha 1 antitrypsin. It inhibits several proteases, especially elastase, protecting tissue from enzymes of inflammatory cells. So that is one function of the alpha 1 globulin, and it's an alpha protein. We have alpha 1 acid glycoprotein or somucoid. So it binds and transports various drugs and endogenous substances. We talk about endogenous substances, chemical substances that are primarily produced by the body itself. And when we talk about xenobiotics like drugs or any other external chemical substances that is introduced in the body, playing a role in inflammatory response. Okay. Then we have alpha 1 fetoprotein. It binds to estrogen and it has a role in fetal development. So alpha 1 fetoprotein 2 is also a tumor marker. When we realize that there is an excessive increase in alpha in alpha 1 fetoprotein, we can suspect cancers such as liver cancer or germ cell cancer over here. Okay. Then we have higher density lipoprotein or alpha 1 lipoprotein. So this one too is what we call the good cholesterol. And what it does is that it mops up all the bad cholesterol from the body. So it transports cholesterol from the tissues to the liver for excretion. So high density lipoprotein 2 is an example of alpha 1 protein. Then we have alpha 2 proteins. So for the alpha 2 proteins, we also have haptoglobin. So haptoglobin, it binds free hemoglobin released from erythrocytes, preventing kidney damage and iron loss. So that is one function of the haptoglobin. So it binds free hemoglobin released from the erythrocyte, preventing kidney damage and iron loss. Then we have alpha 2 macroglobulins. Inhibits a broad range of proteases, playing a role in immune response and inflammation. Then we have ceruloplasmin, transports copper in the blood and has oxidase activity, helping in iron metabolism. Then we have alpha 2 antiplasmin. It inhibits plasmin, the enzyme responsible for fibrinolysis, breaking down of blood clots. Then we have protein C and S. They are also anticoagulants. Alright, by inactivating the factor VA and factor VIIIA in the coagulation cascade. So all these ones, you can read more about them. All that you have to know here is that they are what? They are alpha 1 proteins. And then you should be able to know them and then their function of head.